The footsteps upstairs matched mine, step for step. I was the only one in the house. Alright, welcome back. If you're new here, this is where people send in the stuff that actually happened to them. No scripts, no actors, just real accounts. Today's theme is being home alone, which sounds like nothing, right? Everybody's home alone sometimes. That's kind of the point. It's the most ordinary situation there is, until it isn't. Both of today's stories start out completely normal too, which is honestly what makes them worse. Let's get into the first one. Story 1. The footsteps upstairs. I was 19, still living with my parents, and they'd gone away for a long weekend, some anniversary trip they'd been planning for months. My older brother was supposed to stay with me too, but he bailed at the last minute for a friend's thing, so it ended up being just me in a house that suddenly felt a lot bigger than it usually did. Funny how that works. Same square footage, same rooms, but the second you know you're the only one in it, the whole place feels different, like it's holding its breath along with you. Honestly, the first night was great. I ordered food, watched whatever I wanted without anyone complaining about the volume, went to bed late because I could. Nothing about it felt off. I want to say that clearly, because I know how these stories go, and I'm not going to pretend I had some bad feeling from the start. I didn't. I slept fine. Woke up, made myself breakfast, spent most of the day just doing nothing in particular. The kind of lazy day you don't get much once you're an adult, with a full schedule. Real quick before I keep going, if you're new here, this is the kind of thing we do every week, so hit subscribe now so you don't miss the next one. Alright, back to it. It was the second night that things got strange, and it started small enough that I almost didn't think about it again. I was downstairs around 10, sitting on the couch, and I heard what sounded like footsteps on the floor above me. Not loud, just a couple of steps, the kind of sound an old house makes constantly, settling, creaking, whatever you want to call it. I didn't think much of it. Old houses do that. My parents' place was probably 40 years old at that point, and it made noise all the time, day or night, whether anyone was in it or not. Except then it happened again, maybe 20 minutes later. And this time it wasn't just one or two creaks. It was a clear sequence, like someone walking from one end of the hallway to the other. I sat there for a second, muted the TV, and listened. Nothing. Silence. I told myself it was nothing, went back to my show, and didn't think about it for maybe another half hour. Then I heard it a third time, and this time I stood up. I actually walked to the bottom of the stairs and called out, asked if anyone was up there, feeling a little stupid doing it since I knew, logically, that no one could be. My parents were 4 hours away. My brother was at his friend's. I lived on a quiet street where nothing ever happened. No answer, obviously. I stood there a minute, staring up into the dark hallway at the top of the stairs, and eventually just laughed it off and went back to the couch. Kids do this, right? You hear a house make noise, and your brain fills in the gaps with something scarier than reality. I know that. I told myself that. I actually texted a friend about it around then, half joking, saying something like, pretty sure my house is haunted lol, just to make light of it, the way you do when you want someone else to laugh along, and make the whole thing feel less real. She sent back a laughing emoji, and asked if I wanted her to come, and I said no, I was being dramatic, it was fine. I wish, looking back, I just said yes. Around midnight, I decided to just go to bed. I turned off the downstairs lights, walked up the stairs, and here's the part that still gets me. As I was walking up, I could hear my own footsteps on the stairs, obviously, but I swear there was an echo to them that didn't quite match. Like there was a second set of footsteps, just slightly out of sync with mine, coming from somewhere above. I stopped walking. The extra footsteps stopped too, half a beat late. I stood there on the stairs for what felt like a full minute, not moving, just listening as hard as I could. Nothing. Just my own heartbeat. which at that point I could hear pretty clearly. I actually tried it again, deliberately this time, took 2 more steps and stopped short on purpose, just to see. And there it was again. 2 steps, then a small delay, then what sounded like 2 more steps, settling somewhere above me, before going quiet. I don't know how to explain how certain I felt in that moment that I wasn't imagining, except to say that some part of your brain just knows the difference between a house creaking randomly and something responding to you. I want to be honest and say I almost turned around and slept on the couch that night. Almost. But I felt embarrassed, even with nobody there to judge me. Embarrassed at the idea of being scared of my own house. So I kept going up. My room was at the end of the hallway. I walked the length of it faster than I needed to, and I noticed, passing my parents' room, that their door, which I was sure I'd left closed that morning, was open about a foot, just enough to see the dark shape of their bed inside, undisturbed, nothing out of place. I stood there a second longer than I meant to, just looking at that gap, that dark sliver of room, half expecting something to move in it, even though nothing did. I closed it, told myself I must have misremembered leaving it shut, that maybe the house had just settled, in a way that nudged the door open. Old houses do strange things with air pressure and uneven floors. Went to my room, locked my door, which I never normally did, and got in bed with my phone in my hand, just in case, though I couldn't have told you just in case of what. I didn't hear anything else that night. I fell asleep eventually, mostly out of exhaustion from lying there tense for so long, and woke up the next morning feeling a little silly about the whole thing in the way you do, when daylight makes everything from the night before seem smaller and more explainable. That would have been the end of it, honestly, if not for what I found later that day. I was doing laundry in the afternoon, and our laundry room was off the kitchen, right next to the basement door. I went to grab something I'd left down there, flipped on the basement light, and started down the stairs. Halfway down, I noticed something on the concrete floor that made me stop cold. Footprints. Not muddy ones, not anything dramatic like that, just faint marks in the light layer of dust that always built up down there between my dad's occasional cleanups. A set of footprints leading from the bottom of the stairs to the far corner of the basement, where we kept some old boxes and my dad's tools. And then, as far as I could tell, just stopping there. No return path back to the stairs. They weren't my footprints. I hadn't been down there in weeks. They also weren't my brother's, since he'd been gone since before my parents even left. I stood on those stairs for a long time, just staring at them, doing the math over and over, and never landing anywhere that made sense. I did eventually go down and look closer, which in hindsight maybe wasn't the smartest move, but curiosity got the better of the fear. The footprints were an adult size, bigger than mine, and they were spaced in a way that suggested someone walking normal, not dragging anything, not stumbling, just walking, calm as anything, straight to that corner and stopping. I checked the corner itself for anything disturbed, boxes moved, tools missing, and as far as I could tell, everything was exactly where it always sat. Whoever had walked there hadn't taken anything. They'd just gone and stood in that specific spot for reasons I never came close to figuring out. I thought about that corner a lot in the weeks after, trying to remember if there was anything significant about it, anything that might explain why someone or something would want to just stand there. As far as I knew, it had always just been storage. Old holiday decorations. A workbench my dad barely used anymore. Nothing that seemed worth the trouble of sneaking into a locked house to go stand next to. I called my brother, half hoping he'd tell me he'd stopped by at some point without telling me. He hadn't. I didn't tell my parents when they got back, mostly because I didn't know how to explain it without sounding unhinged, and I've never fully explained it to myself either. For the rest of that summer, I made a point of never going down to that basement alone, always waiting until someone else was home, inventing small reasons to put it off if I was by myself. My parents noticed eventually, asked why I kept avoiding doing laundry until my mom was around, and I just told them I didn't like how cold it was down there, which wasn't exactly a lie, just not the whole truth either. My mom actually laughed and said the basement had always given her a weird feeling too, ever since they'd first bought the place, though she'd never said anything about it before because she figured it was just an old house thing, nothing worth mentioning. That comment stuck with me longer than I expected it to. It made me wonder how many small feelings like that people just carry around quietly in their own homes, never bringing them up because there's never quite enough evidence to justify saying it out loud until something happens that finally gives you a reason to. We moved out of that house about 2 years later, and I remember feeling relieved in a way I never really let myself examine too closely, packing up boxes in that basement for the move and being acutely aware the entire time of that corner and whether whatever had stood there once might still be watching me pack. That's the first story. Quick thing before we get into the next one. If you're new here and you're enjoying this, go ahead and hit subscribe now so you don't miss the next one. It genuinely makes a bigger difference than people think for a channel this size. It costs nothing, takes 2 seconds, and it's honestly the biggest way you can support what we're doing here. Alright, this next one is a little different, less about a house with something in it, and more about someone realizing, slowly, that being home alone might not have meant what she thought it meant. Story 2. The Locked Door. I lived by myself in a small apartment for about 3 years before this happened, and in all that time, nothing had ever made me feel unsafe there. It was a decent building, older, but well kept, the kind of place where you got to know your neighbors a little just from passing them in the hallway enough times. I liked living alone, honestly. Never really had that fear some people talk about, the whole nervous in an empty apartment thing. My place felt like mine, and I moved through it without thinking twice about locks or shadows or any of that. This particular night, I'd gotten home late from work, made dinner, and settled in to watch something before bed. Completely unremarkable. The kind of evening I'd had probably 100 times before in that same apartment. Around 11, I got up to double-check the front door was locked, which was just habit at that point, not because I felt nervous about anything specific. Some nights I did it without even really registering that I was doing it. On autopilot, the way you check your phone is charging before bed. It was locked, deadbolt engaged, chain on, exactly how I always left it. I remember actually feeling a little silly for checking, since of course it was locked. I'd locked it myself hours earlier when I got home. If you're liking these so far, by the way, go ahead and subscribe. It really helps more than you'd think for a channel this size, and it means you won't miss whatever we post next. Okay, continuing on. I went to bed not long after that. I want to say I fell asleep pretty quickly, since it had been a long day, and nothing about that felt unusual either. I woke up sometime later, and I genuinely don't know what woke me. No loud noise, nothing dramatic, just that specific kind of waking up where your body seems to know something before your brain has caught up. I lay there in the dark for a second, trying to figure out why I was suddenly wide awake. Then I heard it. A very soft, very deliberate click coming from the direction of my front door. I told myself it was probably nothing. The building settling, a neighbor coming home late, sounds carrying strangely through old plumbing the way they sometimes did. I almost convinced myself of that. Almost. But something kept me lying there, completely still, straining to hear if it happened again. It did. Another click, followed by what sounded unmistakably like the door handle turning, slowly, carefully, like whoever was doing it didn't want to make noise. My heart was pounding at that point, loud enough that I was sure it would drown out anything else I needed to hear. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could and crept toward my bedroom door, which I'd left slightly open, just enough to see a sliver of the hallway leading to my front door. Every step felt loud, even though I was barely moving. The way your own body seems to work against you when you're trying hardest to be silent. The chain was still on. That was the first thing I noticed, and it gave me a small, strange kind of relief, since it meant whoever was out there couldn't actually get the door open. Not fully, not with the chain engaged. But the door was moving. Just slightly, just a few inches, pulled taut against the chain, like someone on the other side was testing exactly how much give it had, applying just enough pressure to see. And then a little more, and then a little more again, patient in a way that felt worse than if they'd just been slamming against it. I didn't call out. I didn't turn on any lights. I just stood there in the dark hallway of my own apartment, watching my front door strain quietly against that chain for what felt like an unreasonably long time before it finally stopped, the handle easing back into place with the same careful quietness it had been turned with in the first place. I grabbed my phone and called the police from my bedroom, whispering, somehow convinced that speaking any louder would give away that I was awake and aware of what was happening. They told me to stay where I was, stay quiet, and that officers were on the way. I sat on my bedroom floor with my back against the door for what felt like forever, though it was probably only 15 or 20 minutes. When the police arrived, there was no one there. They checked the hallway, checked the stairwell, checked with the building's night security, who apparently hadn't seen anyone unusual come or go. They looked at my front door, confirmed the chain and deadbolt were both intact and undamaged, and gently suggested that maybe I'd heard something else. A downstairs neighbor's door, maybe, sound traveling oddly through the building, the way it sometimes does at night when everything else is quiet enough to make ordinary sounds seem closer than they are. One of the officers, an older guy who seemed like he'd done this 1,000 times, was kind about it, not dismissive exactly, just practiced in the way people get when they've responded to plenty of calls that turned out to be nothing. He told me these things happen more than people think. Someone drunk trying the wrong door, a delivery mix-up, nothing sinister most of the time. I appreciated him saying it, and some part of me wanted badly to just accept that explanation and go back to sleep feeling normal again. I wanted to believe that. I really did. Except two things didn't fit with that explanation, and I've never been able to fully let go of either one. The first was that my apartment was on the 3rd floor, and my front door didn't share a wall or a stairwell landing with any other unit closely enough for a downstairs neighbor's door sounds to have carried the way I'd heard them, directly, distinctly, right outside my own door. The second thing was smaller, almost easy to miss, but I noticed it the next morning when I finally worked up the nerve to look closely at the door myself. Right at the height of the deadbolt, there were faint scratch marks in the paint around the lock, fresh ones, the kind of marks you'd get from someone trying, carefully and repeatedly, to work something into a lock they didn't have the right key for. I took a photo of those marks before I did anything else, some instinct telling me I'd want proof later even if I didn't know what I'd use it for. I showed it to the police officer, who came back out to file a follow-up report, and even he admitted it looked consistent with someone attempting to pick the lock, though without anything else to go on. There wasn't much more they could officially do about it. He suggested I get the lock replaced anyway, just as a precaution, and I did that same week, along with adding a second deadbolt higher up on the door that the building let me install myself. I moved out of that apartment about 4 months later. I never found out who it was, or why my door specifically. Out of every door in that building, the landlord installed a camera in the hallway not long after I reported it. Apparently, I wasn't the only tenant who'd mentioned something similar that same month, though nobody, as far as I know, ever caught anything conclusive on it before I left. I actually ran into one of my old neighbors from that building, maybe a year after I'd moved, completely by chance at a grocery store, and we got to catching up the way you do. She mentioned, almost offhand, that the camera in the hallway had picked up something a couple months after I left. Someone who didn't live in the building, standing outside a door on our floor for almost 20 minutes in the middle of the night, before just walking away. She didn't know if it was the same person. Obviously, no way to know that, but she said it had spooked enough people that a few residents ended up moving out that year, more than usual for that building. I asked her if they'd ever gotten a clear look at whoever it was on that footage, and she said not really, just a build, a hood pulled up, nothing distinctive enough to actually identify. She said the building manager had shared it with the tenants at the time as a general safety notice, telling everyone to be extra careful with their locks, without going into much more detail than that, which honestly sounded exactly like the kind of vague, unsatisfying update you get from a building trying not to alarm people while also covering themselves. I still check my locks 2 or 3 times before bed now, every single night, no matter where I'm living, and I don't think that's a habit I'll ever fully shake. Some things just rewire something in you, and no amount of time makes it fully go back to how it was. My current apartment has a door camera now, the kind that sends a notification to my phone if anything moves in front of it, and my friends tease me a little for how often I check it, but I've stopped caring what that says about me. And that's it for today. If either of these hit a little too close to home, especially on a night when you're the only one in the house, you're not alone in that feeling, trust me. The comment section usually agrees, and it's honestly a little validating seeing how many people have had their own version of one of these. If you enjoyed this one, hit subscribe. It genuinely helps more than you'd think. And if something like this has ever happened to you while you were home alone, send it my way. You might hear your own story on here next. Stay safe out there. I'll see you in the next one.